Hello and welcome to this summit session with my dear friend, Eileen McKusick. Eileen is a pioneering researcher, an inventor, an educator, speaker, and a writer. She's the originator of the healing modality called Biofield Tuning. She's also the author of the book, Tuning the Human Biofield, Healing with Vibrational Sound Therapy. Her most recent book, which we will be discussing, is titled Electric Body, Electric Health, and this comes to us through St. Martin's Press. Eileen, thank you so much for joining the summit this year. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I hope you don't mind. I've got quite a long list of questions that at least help us get oriented and to get our conversation started. So thank you very much for joining us.
It's great to see you too. And you always have questions for me. I thought it was so funny when you're interviewing me because, you know, in the years we've known each other, every time our paths cross, you always say, so what are you learning? You know, what's new with the biofield? And so that's really fun to just be here and have you ask me all the questions you want, and others get to enjoy that conversation between us.
Indeed. And some of my questions are very basic, but some of my questions are going to take us out to the cosmos itself.
Nice.
But let's begin with the basics, because that's important for those listeners who might not be that familiar with your work and even with the human biofield. So let's begin with exactly what is the human biofield?
Well, the definition, the term biofield is sort of a shortening of biomagnetic field. And it's a term that was coined by National Institute for Health researchers in 1994. It's basically the scientific term for what others call the aura or the human energy field. It's just a scientific word for the idea that the body has an energy field. And so that is the biofield. I've kind of come through my own research and observation to give it a slightly different definition. And it's one of the reasons why I want us to have a biofield congress, so we all kind of agree on language. But my sense is that in nature, anything that has an electric current running through it has a magnetic field around it. Like, they're two sides of the same coin. And so you can't, in my mind, really separate the electricity in the body that we all know is there, that drives the heart and our brain waves, and, you know, on every cell has a certain amount of charge across its membrane, right? So there's electric current in the body. There has to be a magnetic field around it. And so to me, my definition has evolved to say that the biofield is the body's electrical system in its entirety.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to ask you to recount a story. It's a story you shared with me, and frankly, I've shared it with other people when they began to ask me about what is biofield tuning and how was it originally discovered. And I'm going to ask you to recount that story. When you first encountered, you were doing some tuning work with somebody on a table, but it was the first time you encountered the edge of the biofield using your tuning forks. And for me, that was such a moment of discovery. And you having such an inquisitive mind, a systematic mind, you stopped, you know, this is different here, and you went back. And really, as I understand it, that began your journey into ultimately what we'll be speaking about too is the anatomy of the biofield and how do we work with it for healing. So just tell us that story again. I think it's a great.
Well, I think that when we tend to think of an aura or a human energy field, especially an aura, as it's sort of traditionally depicted with the 7 layers, and it kind of becomes more diffuse as you go out. So that was kind of what I had in my head. You know, it's just this thing, and it just gets diffused and fades away. So I was really surprised to discover something that felt like a membrane. And to kind of give some context to this, maybe some people are familiar with dowsing rods and how you can use a set of dowsing rods to find the edge of somebody's energy field, or to find water. It's the same idea. It's responding to electromagnetic current. And so what a tuning fork does is kind of the same phenomenon. When dowsing rods, you know, you're walking with them forward and you have the intention you're going to find the edge of the field, they swing open as if they've hit a barrier. And so that when you approach the body, so we, with the assumption and the observation that most people's fields extend around about 6 feet around them, like that's just kind of average. Now, some people's fields can be much bigger, and certain areas, like if you're standing in a ley line or a telluric current, I mean, they're the same thing. You know, what we call ley lines or dragon lines are called by science to be telluric currents, and they're flows of electromagnetic energy, very much like water flows in like little bits and wider bits all over the surface of the earth. So if you're standing in one of those, your field will actually become bigger, and you can discover this with dowsing rods and a tuning fork. And I've done experiments, you know, with people with dowsing rods and tuning forks, and you find things in the same spot. What's really interesting about when we discovered about these ley lines, these dragon lines or telluric currents, is that they also have a double layer membrane that gives them a boundary, right? Otherwise they'd spill out. And so if you're standing in the actual double layer membrane of an earth current, your field gets even bigger, right? So there's all of these sort of geopathic things going on around us that make us expand and also can make us contract. But on average, the human field's around 6 feet. So I had made a discovery many years before that I could find areas of resistance and tension in the space around the body when I passed through the tuning fork. And for 10 years, I just worked over the body, and I would find these areas of resistance. Like, let's say somebody had pain in their shoulder, and I would be holding a tuning fork over it, and it would feel like it was stuck. And it would also go atonal. So there's a feeling like there is a clump of energy there, an actual charge or resistance, right? And anybody who's learned biofield tuning is always amazed when they encounter that. You know, you're moving a tuning fork through empty space, and all of a sudden it feels like it's stuck. Like, it's such a strange feeling, right? You've had that experience, Paul. So, so in the beginning, I was just finding these loud stuck spots and discovering that I could use the tuning fork like a magnet and actually move them. And so I just started kind of moving everything to center, and that was what I did for a long time. Then one day I found a loud spot about 3 feet away from somebody, totally by accident, did the same thing, moved it to center, and the person had a remarkable recovery from that action. So I was like, wow, like, what's going on out here? Because I had only been looking here. I mean, we think that's who we are. Like, I end here. And it wouldn't even occur to me that there's stuff going on in the atmosphere around our body. So I started to explore. And, you know, and I just did this as a hobby back then, Paul. I actually was created the first kettle corn, organic kettle corn in stores way back in 2004. And I had a plan to blow it up and sell it to Frito-Lay. And that's what I was working on. And this is just kind of a hobby. But when I started poking around in the atmosphere on the body, and I started consistently discovering that membrane. Like, you know, the first time I found it, I didn't know if it was just another loud spot or another area of resistance, right? I was like, I'm stuck here. And so, but then when I found that in everybody, it started to dawn on me that our field is bounded by this membrane. And then I found the model of the torus, and how the torus is this sort of self-sustaining electromagnetic model. And suddenly it kind of clicked into place for me. I'm like, of course there's a membrane.
Beautiful. Thank you. So that leads me to want to show this map, which of course you're very familiar with, and presumably some of our listeners. And the result of that discovery you had with the fork led you, as you were describing, to years and years of intensive examination, documentation from across hundreds and hundreds of your clients to begin to map it out. And one of the things I've so appreciated about your work, and I had taken your initial biofield tuning class, as you might recall, some years ago, was that for me, the biofield was this amorphous thing that, other than the chakras, which I had some sense about and some prior experience, I knew nothing about the content about here. And this map that you've published and your practitioners use, and you and I have discussed in the past, began to really delineate. This is a very systematic anatomy, much like the systematic anatomy we all know in our physiology. And I'm going to ask you a question that I often ask you when I see you is, what is some of your, let's say, most recent discoveries about the anatomy of the biofield? What have you discovered, let's say, most recently, that's in this system of ours, and what does it do?
That's a really good question, Paul. Well, what's wonderful about the biofield is that there's still so much to discover, right? So for me, it's very primitive. I'm sort of blindly poking around in it with a tuning fork, but the tuning fork really kind of acts like ultrasound. The way sound waves can bounce off something and through a device create a picture, right? So our brain, our own electrical system can do the same thing with sound, so that when sound is passing through this region and it's bouncing off of the features that are present, if we keep our minds relaxed and open, there's the ability to kind of see and discover things that are present. And so as far as some, like my most recent discovery, I would say I worked on somebody just the other day, and when we think about biofield tuning, it's a healing modality. You tend to think of it as a process of like healing trauma, releasing these places where our electrical system has gone frozen or stuck, or there's a lot of noise in the signal. And we use the tuning fork to kind of groom it out and smooth it down and release the resistance, release the, and so, can be kind of like, oh, I'm healing trauma. But I think one of the greatest gifts for me has been that it reveals people's soul. It reveals like who they are beyond their pain body. Because once the noise in the signal settles down, the part of us that is a reflection of the suffering we've gone through, the tension that we're holding, not just our own, but our cultural tension, our genetic patterning of tension. And so we all experience a very diminished experience of ourselves, because so much of our potential is hidden and in some kind of contraction. And so I'm just thinking about this person that I saw yesterday or the other day, who, as soon as this trauma, very significant trauma from childhood, settled down, what came through was the old soul that he was. And like all of the knowledge that he had gained throughout lifetimes. If you believe in lifetimes, if you don't believe in lifetimes, it's our own ability to access the Akashic record. Like we're mostly water, and really it's all one thing, right? That life is made of. So everything that ever is, was, or will ever be is present in our own electrical body. And so, whether it's soul memories or whether it's the ability to access the collective, there's a grand, the word doesn't even do it justice. There's this incredible beauty in the human soul. And I feel like I'm seeing it more and more, Paul, than I used to. And I'm seeing it more golden and more like people are remembering. I think that there's also, my experience has been, even in the last few years, as the media has told us stories of doom and gloom, there is a level of light that is showing up in the environment, in people. And so I feel like I have access to that more sort of noble, perfect template of a human's fundamental self than ever before.
Well, that's several things for me. One, incredibly beautiful and inspiring. And we all, as you know, and you were stating, we all have biographies which have a multitude of experiences, some more challenging, some not. And people often go to healers to help heal and work on that trauma, but not necessarily with the intention of finding their soul, as you're putting it. And it's so beautiful that your work now is helping people get to that foundational experience of the very essence of their nature. That's really why we all typically seek out healing. We go on the spiritual path, as you know, is to discover ourselves. So biofield tuning is helping us get there. And then I really appreciate too that you brought up a lot of the messaging in the media and elsewhere the last few years, because I was going to ask you about that. Let's see, there's the inspiring side of it that we're speaking about, that it's been opportunity. But also, I imagine you've noticed that it's had, let's say, adverse effects on people's biofield. Certainly, we've seen more depression lately, anxiety due to social isolation, and a host of things. How is that sort of phenomenon reflected in the biofield? how do these types of messages on just the social environment adversely affect our biofield? I want to speak about that for a moment and then come back to the revealing of the light. But I think it's important people also have a sense of how things can adversely affect their field.
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, in the model that I work with, what we call ourselves, I, is this electrical system. It is our inner light. It's our soul. It's our consciousness. It's our biofield, right? This is the sense of I. When you're alive, you're lit and you're moving around, you're doing your thing. When you die, your light goes out. So everything that we experience, every feeling that we experience is like pulsations in the electrical system. And every feeling has a different kind of pulsation. It makes a different note or a different song. And so when we feel fear, and there's an epidemic of fear and anxiety and uncertainty. There's so much uncertainty, and living comfortably with uncertainty is an incredibly difficult discipline to master. And so, I had the good fortune of being through very difficult circumstances for a long time that were uncertain continuously, and it broke me. There was a time I just turned inside out of upset because everything was so uncertain, and to that point where I was like, I'm never going to fuss again because it all worked out, right? And then I turned myself inside out with upset, and then everything worked out. And so I vowed to never be upset with uncertainty again. But for people who haven't had that kind of cathartic experience like I went through, it's a ringer. It's a terrible feeling, not knowing what to expect or what's going to happen. And there's so many things that people can be fearful of. But when you run the current of fear in the electrical system, so you can hear it in a tuning fork. It's kind of a wild thing, but the tuning fork kind of, it's almost like an invisible ink decoder that creates a field of sound that allows you to hear the sounds that are going on in the body. And so fear has a very distinct pulsing quality. So when we're running fear, our electrical system is really expending twice the amount of energy that it needs to, because instead of being doo, it's going doo. And so what this does is, one, it's exhausting. It wears us out because we're, it's like having a car that you were getting 40 miles to the gallon and now you're just getting 20 when you run fear. It also, because of the movement of the gyration of the pulse, it stops us from seeing and perceiving clearly what's really going on, right? That false evidence appearing real acronym of fear. And so, so we're creating a whole tempest in a teapot, imagining that things are out to get us when they're really not. So it's really misuse of energy, right? Because it goes nowhere. It's an investment with zero return, and it just creates more chaos. But when it's so thick in our environment and so thick in our culture, people who are empaths, who are sensitive, they might even have their own fear, but they're picking up on it from everybody else and haven't yet learned how to find their own calm center, right? So you just kind of tossed about in the waves of the culture. And depression has a tone. It's very distinctive. It makes me think of Eeyore in Winnie the Pooh. It's like gray. Yeah. and when you hear it in something and that's how they feel, right? So the body's just got this tone in it. Another thing that we don't really talk about so much is that one of the things we know about sound waves is that they carry mass. Okay, so this relatively recent discovery of science. Well, we have all of these Wi-Fi and all of these signals, electromagnetic currents, carrying information. And even though it's infinitesimally small, it's constant, right? And so that actually creates a pressure in the environment that makes people feel like they have pressure on their chest, this, and then you're leaning over and doom scrolling and you're not breathing, right? So this is all a consequence of our environment. Listen, if you let your fish tank get dirty, the fish are going to get sick. It's not the fish's fault. So we're in a really dirty fish tank, and people are getting sick, and they're stressed, and they're scared, and they're blaming themselves. But you don't need to go get a pill. You're not going to go give your fish pills because their fish tank is dirty. You're going to clean the tank. And so we need to recognize how much our environment is inducing bad feelings into us, and that there's nothing wrong with us, that we need to figure out a way to push back on our environment and make it more coherent, more beautiful, more orderly, more predictable in small ways, or whatever we need. We don't have to be victims of what's going on out there. We can strengthen our own electrical system and kind of create and bring around our own kind of bubble of our own choosing. It's not the easiest thing to do, but it is possible.
That's a beautiful message. And I would say that's much of, I think, the message of your book, this most recent book about raising your voltage, the way we do protect ourselves, maintain our own well-being, not only our physical body, but also our soul body and so forth, is by having the energy to support it in the environment. And ultimately, would you agree that we can put ourselves in such a state, let's say a tuned state of our biofield, amongst other things, to really have quite a resistance to these adverse effects from the fields around us? Earlier you spoke about how when our field encounters fields in the earth, these ley lines and so forth, that they can actually expand our field. My field can expand being in a very positive, high energy space. And I think you're describing now too, of course, the inverse happens environmentally. Maybe we can call it social pollution, media pollution, whatever it is. However we're responding to that, our field can contract, number one, but also you're describing can get very dense and incoherent in a multitude of layers that then we perceive, obviously, as being, number one, we're not so tuned into our soul life anymore, and we're carrying around anxiety and depression. And I know much of your work has been to awaken us to that. One of the things I've always admired, you tell people when you're speaking to them, you say, you're amazing. Because we human beings really are amazing. We just haven't been educated and given the tools to keep ourselves awake and healthy on the multitude of levels. So will you speak a little bit about this concept of raising your voltage? How do I raise the voltage of my body-mind system? And then within that, to keep me kind of immune, at least have higher resistance to adverse effects of day-to-day living?
Good question. Well, the first thing that comes to mind when you ask how you raise your voltage, as I understand it, oxygen has free electrons. And so when we breathe in oxygen, those free electrons are what bind to the hemoglobin in our blood, and why blood becomes red, because it's got light in it now. And that light, that juice, that electrical charge gets dropped off at cells, and cells make use of it in the way that cells do. So, we can go for weeks, some people go for months, some people don't eat at all, apparently, right? So we're not getting our primary juice that we run on from food. And we can go for days without liquids. Some people can dry fast for a long time. So obviously we're not getting our electrical juice from there either. Where it seems we get most of our life force is from breathing in the atmosphere and the environment that we're in. And so the more fully and freely we breathe, the more electric juice we deliver to our electrical system. And one of the only claim that I really make about biofield tuning is that it helps people to relax and breathe. Because all of these places where we're holding anxiety, where we're holding depression, where we're holding grudges or grievances or stories or negative beliefs, they're all heavy and there's no breath in them. And when we're mentally or energetically indulging these states, we're not breathing. We're not breathing fully, we're not breathing freely, we're not breathing openly, we're not breathing with gratitude. We're just kind of collapsed in, running an imbalanced, dissonant, distorted pattern in our system, telling ourselves some kind of story, right? And so we're just cutting off our own juice right there. So the number one, just in the very simplest thing, is to just monitor your breath. Catch yourself when your hackles go up and you start overthinking, and you're like, like, whoa, wait a minute. Okay, all right. And to just do that again and again and again, because all of that kind of imbalanced thinking, that the stuff that people do with their minds is sort of a mismanagement of the incredible creative power of our being. You know, we're so creative. Our word is so creative, and we could be doing amazing things, but most people are locked and trapped in patterning in their electrical system that is self-defeating. And that's all mind viruses from the culture. You know, we've been told in so many ways that we're not good enough. And so we just believe that, and we internalize it, and we kind of like end up like a chicken pecking at itself, you know, instead of being pecked on by others. So
Well,
you know,
that's
that
unfortunate.
I know. It's an incredible misuse of imagination and power. And so much of it, in my observation, is driven by guilt, which is really interesting. It seems to be like the underlying kind of thing that like saps our juice and our aliveness. Is this sort of self-worth and guilt story. So noticing not only when you're not breathing, but what kind of stories are you telling yourself? What kind of emotions are you running? How is your body? Like, one of the things that I observe as part of the biofield anatomy is what I call the posture of victimhood. And that is when our energy goes all scrunched down into our left hips. In the biofield anatomy, I've observed that an imbalance in the left hip often relates to frustration and disappointment, especially over our own needs not being met, right? And just above it in the solar plexus on the left is powerlessness. So when we're feeling powerless and unheard and our needs aren't being met, we're putting ourselves in victim mode. We're all just like scrunching down, you know, into this posture that goes along with it. We're not breathing, we're telling some kind of story where we're a victim and there's some perpetrator, right? And if you just become self-aware and step back and go, look what I'm doing, and just stand up straight, like straighten up and fly right, you know, just bring yourself into energetic alignment on axis, connect to the earth, connect to the sun, take a breath, come back to this moment. Because standing straight in this moment, being fully present, is where your body functions the best. And that's health, right? And it's only available right here and right now when you're groovy. Everybody take a breath.
Groovy. I haven't heard that in a while, but I appreciate it. It's fascinating. You're so right that, I mean, breath is our fundamental connection to staying alive in the world, to having all the features of a vibrant system from mind, body, spirit. And yet, few of us know how to breathe and maintain that. And you're describing a lot of the reasons why, just these so-called mind viruses. Would you say, is that synonymous with thought forms? I mean, I have experience with thought forms, these things floating around that do impinge on our field and our environment. Is that what you mean by a mind virus?
Yeah, I would say that they kind of go hand in hand. Like
Right.
that the mind virus, that the train of thought that's embedded in and that's running, that has juice, right, and charge, attracts external kind of electromagnetic thought forms, or, you know, people have different names for them. But, you know, I would say when I encounter something like that, I'm like, there's something hanging on with you that isn't self. You know, it's just
Got it.
not self. And that voice, a lot of suicidal ideation, you know, is not self. It is not coming from self. Self wants to live, like the life force wants to live. But, you know, there are entities, I don't even want to use the word entities, there are life forms, you know, that we can't see. And parasitical ones. And so a lot of times when people are really upset, it is a possibility that, you know, something that is not self is kind of glommed onto them and is informing their system. And it's nothing to be scared of. You know, basically get rid of the thought that's feeding it and it will go away. You know, you don't have to be like, get it off me, just recognize what it's attaching to and correct that. So in biofield tuning, whenever I find something like that, I don't even worry about it. I just correct the attachment point and I smooth it over. I'm like, see, it's not magnetically attracting that anymore.
Love it. This reminds me of one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and it has to do with concepts around synchrony and resonance. First of all, when somebody has a mind virus that's, let's say, connected, there's some kind of resonance there that is enabling that. Now, resonance around, let's say, people who meditate in groups. There have been studies showing that their EG might synchronize, or their heart rate variability. Also within groups, we know this phenomenon, often called group consciousness, which you can perceive that this consciousness around a group of people actually come into form as a space, and then everybody's plugged into that consciousness, and it could be a great thing. You're at a ball game, everybody's enjoying the space and the vibration, or at the ashram meditating. But these phenomenon where that level of connectivity is supporting something, I imagine within that, that's related to what you were just saying about we can either be uplifted in such a group consciousness environment for well-being, or to not so much be so. How does the biofield itself, the structure, particularly let's say around whatever is in the anatomy, support what we experience as group consciousness? When we're all jiving, we're all feeling good together because we're, again, maybe at a ball game or some other experience. Do you know how that works? What about the field that supports that connectivity?
Well, if we don't stop at our skin, right? Like if I extend around me, like, so where do I end? And yes, there is a boundary at around 6 feet, but if I keep going out, I find multiple rings. I've gone 60, 80 feet away. I'm like, kind of hit multiple rings and boundaries. It's like toroids within toroids within toroids. So, the drop of sun that is our own electrical system, and the drops of water, that we are, is part of the one light, the one water. Right. So what happens, at a concert or anything where everybody just gets entrained into resonance together. And so their rhythm, their vibe, their tone, their inner song, everybody is, we're all going to sing the same song. And so you just end up, just like, have you ever seen that experiment where they take a bunch of metronomes and they put them on a surface, but the surface can roll like it's on a roller, and you start the metronomes all at different times. But then if they're free to keep, the surfaces slightly movement, then they all sync up. And that's just nature, right? That's just physics. And so it can be a beautiful thing. You asked earlier about how sensitive people can navigate. How can you kind of have your own sort of bubble of coherence? But a strong coherent signal overtakes a weak coherent signal and entrains it into coherence. Right? So your job to become less sensitive and less buffeted by other people's bad vibes is to strengthen your own coherence in your system. And that's one of the ways that we raise our voltage. And we do that, there's a few other ways that you can do that. And I think one of the most effective, but potentially one of the most difficult, is to speak your truth diplomatically and successfully as soon as you can when discomfort is going on. And because I've noticed that so many people will swallow their words and not say what they should have said, and then they spend so much mental and emotional energy, dealing with something that happened way back there that you should have managed way back there. So staying really clean and clear with everybody and in each moment, so that you're not lugging around a sack of like uncompleted conversations that creates a lot of drag. Like, if you're upset with somebody, find a way to tell them. If you value your relationships, communicate you're upset. Believe that they want to work through it with you. Don't, get it out. And if you can't speak to the person directly, talk about it with other people, create art, write a song, express. So even with the modern meditation and mindfulness movement that we've got going on, that's asking everybody to sit down and to shut up, basically, I really feel like what we need to actually do is get up and move. Humans historically have danced a lot and sang a lot, and especially the last few years has really killed the music and killed people's expression, and people are afraid of offending other people, and so many people are keeping their mouths shut, and all of that energy gets locked and trapped inside of us. So finding different ways to make noise, to express, to have fun. Having fun and laughing raises your voltage like nothing else, like dancing, laughing, having a good time, hugs, love, and, like all that good stuff. The good things in life and the things that are free, they're all free.
What you're speaking about now is one of the things I've so admired about you, having watched you over the years as your work developed. And essentially what you're saying now, and you've been saying it for a while, is that, we have these beautiful, glorious human bodies with much of it still kind of a mystery to us as far as all the endowments and the faculties, but that the body works best with self-expression. Number one, you were speaking earlier about being what we often call real time in conversation. Don't let yourself crush down, speak what you need to speak when it's timely actually. Dancing, singing, all the things that get the energy moving, the vibration, what we do to raise our voltage. It's such a perennial message that, and we unfortunately haven't had it so much in our culture, but I love it that your systematic work with the biofield naturally led to this discovery, naturally led to this message. It's almost as if you couldn't have come upon a different message, because this is the foundational message: to be a vibrant, alive, fully functioning soul and human being here on the earth. Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And, and that potential is in everybody that I've ever seen. Underneath the burdens that have been laid on them is a very bright and beautiful and brilliant being, like without exception, Paul, without exception.
Yeah, agreed. Regarding that, is there anything you'd like to say about ether? You spend quite a bit of time on this topic in your book. And do you want to share anything about the ether in relation to what we're discussing now? How this all fits together for us?
Well, I think, I was drawn to philosophy and science and spirituality and all of that very early on. My late teens, I read like all the kind of classic books when you're on that kind of journey. And I came to the awareness that it is the illusion of separation more than anything that creates the problems that we have in the world today. It is, having had the revelatory experience of visceral unity consciousness, I know on a cellular and a soul level that I am that, and that that it's all one. But the way that the English language is, the way that we've been conditioned to look at the world, is that everything is separate, that my body ends here, and that, I'm me. And this is where greed comes from, and selfishness, and lack of empathy, and lack of compassion, and all of the terrible things that make, life not what it could be, right? If we all kind of had more freedom to be who we really are. So I forgot where I was going with that, Paul. What was the question? Something I wanted to say.
Well, I was speaking about how I've tracked all of your biofield work over the years and watched how your ideas and let's say your messaging has changed over time. And for me, the conclusions that you've been speaking about for the last couple of years about what it takes for us to be healthy, vibrant human being is a natural conclusion based on all your work with the biofield.
Right.
And the biofield, singing, dancing, movement, speaking our truth in real time, not holding things in. These are all the ingredients for us to have an awake, fully functioning biofield, interacting properly with our environment.
Right.
Health and well-being. That's it.
And that's key, interacting with our environment, because nature and the cosmos are harmonious. And we have that same potential for harmony in us. So it's the noise in the signal, it's the distortions, it's the anxiety, it's the depression, it's the generations of addiction to drama that get in the way of us having a healthful, harmonious, interconnected feel with nature. When you go, I am that, right? That the water that's there, that the sunlight that's there, like that's in me, I am that. So part of the body's electrical system are light, right? It's all one light. It's all one light. And we're light and water. It's all one water. So there is no separation. And so to me, bringing in this concept of ether. Ether is a unifying concept. We say ether is the ground state of that. It is basically like it's a field of light and pure potential, and that through torsion, through the action of spiraling, which is something we're never taught about, torsion or spirals has been conveniently left out of our education, along with phi, the golden mean, the golden ratio, we're not taught about that, and the phi spiral, right? Why aren't we taught about those things? Because nature has this harmony and order, and we are that. We are. And so if people had the opportunity, to really be quiet inside and to really be connected to nature, that's where healing comes from. More than anything, what healing comes from our connection to nature, letting nature heal us. Nature is what keeps us alive. Every breath I take, you can get healed with your own breath, breathing in nature. I tell a little story about how I went on a hike, and it was a pretty long hike. And when I was coming back down the hill, my left knee started to bother me. At the time, I had kind of a misalignment in that joint. And there was this beautiful big beech tree on the way down the hill, and I stopped in front of it and I asked it to heal me. And I opened myself up to that. And I connected my consciousness to the tree and the codes of nature and healing, and all of those codes for perfection are all there if we're quiet enough to have them reflected to us and fed to us in the love and the caring of the tree. And my knee stopped hurting, and I walked all the rest of the way down, and it didn't hurt at all, and it didn't bother me the next day. So healing can be that simple. Right? But we have all these beliefs and stories and all these things in the way but just by letting ourselves meld into the health and harmony of the natural environment, we're healed.
Beautiful. And as you were saying, if I'll emphasize the aspect of the unity, that fundamentally we are the universe. There's no separation on any level of it whatsoever, particularly, of course, consciousness itself. And it's beautiful that your work helps people to begin to open that up. And as you know, there's a lot of research these days. You mentioned mindfulness, other forms of meditation, where the focus has been on the brain and what signatures in the brain itself, typically through fMRI, sometimes EEG, are supporting states of non-duality or oneness. And that's good work, but I think ultimately we need to get more sophisticated research on the biofield, and really that's going to start showing how some of the patterns of energy and how the anatomy works there that really support these states of consciousness and realization as we come back into our own inheritance as beings.
Yeah.
And speaking of,
when you say that, Paul, sorry to interrupt, but you just gave me such a thought. It's like when you look, especially with my understanding of the biofield, and like it's so big and there's so much going on, and as the anatomy map is there, all these things I've discovered, it seems so silly to be only focused on the brain when there's so much more going on. And like what I said earlier, still so much to discover.
I fully agree with that. Let's discover it. Related to this question of the universality of our own very self, many religious traditions state that we have been created in the image of God. And conceptually, we can add that we are God herself, the creator herself, in a physical form in this third dimension. Have you experienced, or do you care to speculate on what does that literally mean as far as our biofield, our chakra system, everything we know ourselves to be as human beings? How does that relate to concepts that we are created in the image of the creator?
It's funny that you should ask me that, because I'm reading a book right now where I actually came across that exact passage earlier this morning about Sophia and being the universe herself, and that she's like in human form and that everything is inside her, and we certainly see fractals with a repetition of the micro to the macro, the same form on every scale, right? And then there's that saying, man is the measure of all things. So, yes, it's all, what is it? The Native American myth about how the earth is on a turtle, right? And the turtle's on a turtle, and the turtle's on a turtle. And what is this? Turtle's all the way down, right? And another way to look at that is a metaphor for a torus. And what I was saying about the human energy field and how each level we go out, right? It's toruses all the way out. So, yeah, I would agree with that statement, that how could it really be any other way? And we, if the water and the light that comprises who we are is the same water and light that's existed from the beginning of time, right? And it is within the cosmos. So all of everything that water and light has experienced collectively is in us, which is an amazing thing, right? We're so amazing. And instead of being able to access this, and not to take away from meditation, Paul, because there is something, we do both.
Sure.
We can be mindful and still and jump up and jump around, let's not eschew one for the other. That we have the ability to access all of that information and all of that greatness and all of that amazingness. It is in every single one of us if we can quiet the mind enough. And get rid of the stories and the pain and the noise and the static and just be what we are. And it's not about being worthy of it or anything. It's just you are biologically one with all of creation and have been since the inception of the universe, if it ever began.
There it is. We covered this a little bit earlier, but I want to circle back to it because it's highly important. We've spoke a little bit about the pandemic that's been going on, how it's been adversely affecting many people, but also affecting people in a positive way as they've thought to take advantage of the circumstances to further develop themselves. And one of the areas people are working on is the concept of sovereignty. And as you know, this has to do with when we as human beings, we stop accessing the environment for information we need. Should I go left? Should I go right? Should I do this? Should I not? We're not seeking it from outside cues. It's coming internally from the wisdom of our own being, the wisdom of our higher consciousness, and so forth. So this is often typically called sovereignty. Your work, as you've described it so far, I think helps support people to develop sovereignty so that we are functioning, yes, socially, responsibly, but we're also an autonomous human being, knowing what is best for us here and there and now and then. Can you speak about that from, again, the point of view of the biofield, and how do we help cultivate sovereignty in ourselves?
That's such a great question, Paul. Thank you for that. So what comes to mind is we did a study last year where we had 15 volunteers each receive 3 biofield tuning sessions at a distance. And what was fascinating was that every volunteer by the time they went out of the study, were no longer clinically anxious. And it was really interesting to read people's experiences. And one of them was, I actually know when I'm thirsty now. I know when I'm hungry now. So when we're anxious and when we're afraid, we can't tune into our own bodies, or if we've had so much pain that we've just disconnected from our own bodies. We talk about this in our culture, this whole idea of do you go with your head and what you think, or do you go with your heart and what you feel? And what's left out of that either or equation is the triangulation of going with your gut and what you know. Right? Because we all have a knowing. We've all had that places where, you don't know what you're going to do. And then suddenly, there's a knowing and you're not waffling anymore. And that's very much a gut sense. It comes from the core of our being. It is our electrical system. It's our instincts. It's, all of that stuff, our very subtle antennas that are interfacing with the body and the world. And if you are in fear or if you are in pain, you don't know how you feel about something. And then you need someone to tell you, And the very few times in my life where I've just kind of had a really bad day, I'm in crisis, I'm like, honey, you decide what we're doing for dinner. It's I don't have the bandwidth for that. So I think in order to have that kind of sovereignty, to have that kind of knowing of what your own truth is, you have to get a lot of noise out of the signal. And so that's what biofield tuning does, is it finds where the noise is in the signal, it reflects it back to the body, and then the body has an opportunity to use that reflection to tune itself. Just like you seeing yourself in a mirror to take the poppy seed out of your teeth, right? The field has the same kind of like, oh, I want to groom myself. I want to be in order. And so, it puts itself in order. And so then when you're not in fear, you're not in anxiety, you're not in depression, you can be like, wow, I'm hungry right now. And this is exactly what I want and need. Right. Or, having social pressure put on me to do something, and my body is actually saying no, and I'm really feeling that. And that's actually what's most important to me, is what my own body, my own instincts, my own inner authority is telling me. And we all have the right as human beings to respond to our own truth, assuming that it's healthy, right? Not that like, oh, I want to murder you and that was my truth. Like, no, right? But when we're coherent, we do the right thing. We are in integrity, it kind of goes hand in hand. But that's a luxury. Having a clear, coherent, strong signal in this environment is a luxury. And it's taken me decades, Paul, of very hard work and very fringe research and taking risks and being weird, in order to get to that place of health and resilience and sovereignty and knowing, what's right for me and what's not right. It's my job to take care of my body. It's nobody else's job to take care of my body. And I'm the only one who knows what is right for my body. Nobody else can tell me that.
Thank you. That was so clear and strong and convincing for me. Thank you. I think related to this, but I want to bring up what's the final section of the most recent book, the Electric Body, Electric Health. And the final section of the book is titled, We Are the Ones We've Been Waiting For. And we've covered this a bit, but I'd like you to share with us, what are you saying there?
Well, it kind of brings me back to that story I told you about, the tune-up I gave the other day. It was a young man, he was 21 or 22. And I uncovered this beautiful, brilliant old soul in there. And reflected that back to him. And anytime I do that, one of the great gifts in that is I reflect it back to people, and they already know, but very few people ever go, hey, I see your gift, and it's that, you know what I mean? So tuning is this opportunity for us to be in a safe space, for me to feel and hear and see. And everybody, this is the thing, Paul, is that everybody knows their own greatness. They know their own brilliance. They've just been conditioned to not believe in themselves. And so, right, that's all you have to do is know that it's true, it's in there, and believe in it and feed it and nourish it, because that part of you is your gift. And you are like, you give your gift to the world. It's actually a very selfless thing to do, because the more we excavate our own greatness, the more that we can give that.
Thank you. Love that message too. It's true. We are all completely unconditionally loved, regardless of anything we've ever done or not done. But it's hard for us to innately know that. We're not educated to know that, but it is true, as you're saying, just our inherent greatness, and we have things to contribute to the world. We just have to excavate it. Sometimes excavation takes a little bit longer, but that's part of the job of being a human being, to discover our greatness and to kind of give witness to that and share it with other people.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I mean, that's the hero's journey, really, is like discovering.
Very much so.
Yeah, and then bringing it back, and then you have it to share. And so if you don't believe in your own greatness, you're never going to go through the journey to uncover it and then give that gift back to the community. Because it really is about that connectivity, because we're all one. And anything that you do to big up yourself is going to big up all of us.
I so appreciate that entire meta myth. And of course, along the meta myth, there's always allies who come to help us along. And then there are also the adversaries who we might bump up against, and hopefully we'll speak our truth in real time then and not back off and shrink, as you were speaking about earlier. That's our journey. I've so appreciated our conversation, Eileen. I want to ask you, is there any final words you want to share with all the summit attendees?
Well, our strength comes our greatest strength, again, coming into this all is one thing, right? Whenever two or more of you are gathered in my name, our strength comes from connecting with each other. And I think that one of the things that's happened, in the world, there was already isolation and disconnection going on, and now it's become even greater. And so, I don't know, whatever, but, even in virtual communities, we can connect. One of the things that I do in the Biofield Tuning community, I did it for a few months straight, was I would bring the community together, kind of like Sunday morning church, and we would all do a group tuning together. I'd start everybody off the first 10 minutes, then everyone would go and do a tuning separately, and then I'd bring us all back together for the last 10 minutes. And at the end of each one of those, we all, I don't know if we all did, but people voiced, and I certainly felt, a sense of connection through the ether, right? So this is kind of like, what is the ether? Well, if you think about that, there's a whole connective medium instead of a vacuum or a void. Through having that as part of your cosmological story, even in a virtual environment, you can still experience a sense of connectivity and oneness and solidarity with other people. And I think that that's really important, and it's really, really nourishing, to have these opportunities for community. Nobody does anything great by themselves. I've had the very good fortune of having an incredible team that has helped me, especially over the last 4 years, to grow a business that's being impactful in the world. I would never have been able to do that by myself, ever. Right? So if you have a dream or a desire to make an impact in the world for good, and if you're watching this summit, you are, the solution comes through togetherness, not trying to go it alone, right? So find your tribe, find a team, start to build, even if it's just you and one other person, and work together on things. Don't try to be a self-sufficient individual. Now more than ever, we need the strength that comes from being together. Yeah.
Beautiful. I can't think of a better way to close our conversation together. Thank you, Eileen. It's always a pleasure, a joy, and inspiring to speak with you. I've really loved hearing all of your most recent insights and messages, particularly what you were just speaking there at the end, the importance of working together in groups to help support each other on our journeys. So I wish you the best, continued work with your biofield and healing and discoveries, and I'll look forward to our next conversation sometime, someplace.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. It is always a pleasure, and I hope that opportunity comes sooner than later.
Me too. All right. Bye for now.